Hello learners, welcome to this session today. We will be talking about core conditions in counseling. In the beginning of this course, you have learned about the meaning of counseling. You have also learned about the process of counseling and the stages in counseling. In this video today, you will learn about some specific core conditions in counseling that are required to be present in the counseling situation so that counseling can be effective. That is why these are called as the core conditions. These need to be fulfilled in the counseling situation. These are the prerequisites in any counseling situation. These core conditions set the tone of the counseling situation, or we can say that these set the stage for proper counselor-client relationship so that counseling can be effective. In fact, earlier when you have learned about the humanistic theories in counseling, you have learned about these core conditions also. Carl Rogers, who is the propounder of this theory, he has talked about these core conditions in counseling. He calls these core conditions as necessary and sufficient conditions for therapeutic personality change. As you already know, counseling serves different purposes or it has different goals to fulfill. However, the main aim of counseling is to help the clients help themselves, to enable them, to equip them, to facilitate them in making wise decisions or proper choices. Aim of counseling is also to empower them to make their own decisions, to solve problems effectively. So counseling helps the client gain an understanding of oneself, be self-aware, communicate effectively, and make effective adjustment. So to fulfill these aims of counseling, the counseling process requires fulfillment of certain core conditions. Further, counselor-client relationship needs to be a professional relationship also. Okay, then only counseling can be effective and achieve its aims or goals. And this professional relationship, it requires certain core conditions to be fulfilled. Core conditions in counseling are important because of the following reason. So let us see why these core conditions are important. First of all, it helps to achieve the goals of counseling. It helps to achieve a professional counselor-client relationship. Also, it facilitates establishing a connect or rapport with the client and facilitates developing trust in the counselor. Okay, and it also ensures ethical practices in counseling. Okay, so therefore, it is the responsibility of the counselor to establish or to fulfill the core conditions in counseling in the beginning itself and also throughout the counseling process. So now let us see what are these core conditions in counseling. There are three main core conditions that we talk about in counseling. These are unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence or genuineness. So let us now discuss each of this. What is that meaning? What do they mean? How do they benefit? And how do we create or use them in counseling situation? So first of all, unconditional positive regard. Now, let us think about a counseling situation. A client has come to the counselor seeking help. However, the client doesn't know the counselor and is not confident about how the counselor will receive him or what the counselor will think about him when the client shares his personal feelings, issues, or anxieties or insecurities. So the client is naturally apprehensive about the confidentiality of what he will share during the counseling process. The first thing that is required here is acceptance of the client by the counselor. This is reflected through the counselor showing positive regard or respect for the client, and that too unconditionally. This is important for any healthy relationship, to be able to respect the other person for what he or she is, or accept the other person as an individual in totality, so that the person can share things without any fear of rejection or criticism. So, as I said, unconditional positive regard, it refers to providing regard or respect to the client. However, this regard or positive regard needs to be unconditional also. That is, displaying regard for the client that doesn't depend on anything. Okay, so it is not conditional. For instance, Usually, if someone has done good things, you respect. And if the person has done some negative things, you think of the person in negative terms. You judge that person, that how could he did such a thing, or you blame the person for his problems, etc. However, when we are talking about unconditional positive regard, the counselor needs to be non-judgmental. The counselor needs to accept the client as he or she is, and do not judge or blame or criticize or say any negative comments to the client. Whatever it is, whatever the client has done or not done, the counselor needs to see the client as an individual in their own right and accept the client as they are and provide support to the client. Even if the client has done something negative, still the first requirement in counseling is to accept the individual as being basically good by nature and convey unconditional positive regard. uh, if we take another example, like a class, let us take a class 3 child who has stolen a pencil from his friend's bag in the school. So usually what we do is to brand the whole child as bad who steals things. However, what we need to focus here is that the behavior or the action of stealing by the child is bad, but not the whole child. So, in unconditional positive regard, the counselor doesn't judge the client as good or bad, or have done good or bad or negative things, or the client has come from other different backgrounds or social class or sexual orientations or disability or from different cultures, religions, etc., which the counselor might consider negatively. So, as we can see here, that the counselor needs to look at the client as an individual, a human being, not in terms of their background or their behavior or actions. So we need to distinguish between the client as an individual and their behavior. So, as we can see here that the Nelson Jones talks about the clients are more likely to blossom and change if prized for their human potential rather than rejected for their human failings. So, hence, as an individual, as a human being, the client deserves to be respected, accepted, and provided support in the counseling situation. Then only the client can develop trust on the counselor. The client can open up with the counselor. A rapport can be established, which is a crucial requirement in counselor client relationship, without which counseling cannot progress further. So, once a rapport is formed with the help of the unconditional positive regard, the issues can be discussed further. Okay, and the client can be helped to gain alternate or different perspectives and modify their thoughts or actions. Okay. So, further, here it is to be noted that accepting the client and showing unconditional positive regard does not mean endorsement or acceptance of all sorts of behaviors of the client. Okay, it just means that you are respecting the client as an individual. Okay. Carl Rogers also have said here that providing unconditional positive regard to someone doesn't mean you are accepting each and every action of that person, but you are accepting the person as an individual in their own rights at a deeper level rather than looking at their surface behaviors only. This makes the other person to develop trust and open up before the counselor. Okay. So, unconditional positive regard helps the client express himself freely, openly, without any fear of judgment. And clients feel that their thoughts and feelings are being listened to. The clients feel validated. Okay. So, Rogers, who is a humanistic psychologist, has used unconditional positive regard as a technique in his client centered therapy or person centered therapy. Okay. Counselor can express unconditional positive regard, which makes the counseling effective. Okay. So now let us see, and when you're talking about unconditional positive regard, the first thing is that accepting the client as a human being, as an individual, and showing acceptance for the client, so that counselor client relationship becomes more effective. Now, the second core condition that we will be talking about here is empathy. You must have heard about the term empathy. Empathy commonly refers to putting yourself in another person's shoes. Usually, we say that you put yourself in other person's shoes, that you will be then we will be able to know about the other person's feelings or thoughts. Okay, so when we engage in empathy, we can actually know about what and how the other person thinks and feels. Thus, the counselor tries to understand things from the client's perspective. And why this is important? Because this helps the client feel understood and feel accepted. Also, it helps to form a rapport between the counselor and client, because establishing a rapport is very important in a counseling situation. Now, let us see how Rogers has defined empathy here. Rogers defines empathy as to sense the client's private world or the client's inner world as if it were your own, but without ever losing the as if quality. Okay, so that is, you feel you are able to sense you are sensing the client's inner world as if it is your own. Okay, but you are very much aware that it is the client's, but you are able to see the client's inner world. Okay. So Alfred Adler also has defined empathy as seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. Okay. So the counselor needs to understand the thoughts and feelings of the client from the client's perspective and then convey it accurately back to the client. This helps the client feel validated and valued, that their thoughts and feelings are understood by the counselor. So thus, as we see here, empathy is, it is an active process, okay, where one needs to actively listen to what the client is saying, how the client is feeling, and also we need to notice the body language of the client. Now, here, Richard Nelson Jones, he talks about different aspects which are involved in the process of showing empathy. How do we show empathy? There are different aspects which are involved here. First is observing and listening. That is, you attend to the client's verbal and non-verbal language. That is what the client is saying, how the client is saying, is verbal expressions, vocal expressions, bodily communication, the gestures, the postures, etc. Okay. So after you observe and listen to these things, then you resonate. So resonating is the next aspect, where you resonate the feelings of the client, that what exactly the you have felt about the client, how the client is feeling. You also tend to feel some of the emotions the client is experiencing. So this is called resonating. Then discriminating, that is, you differentiate what are the important things in what the client has said, his verbal, vocal, and body language. Okay, and then formulate a response based on this. That is what exactly you are going to convey to the client. Okay. So the next aspect comes is the communicating. So you communicate this response to the client, and while communicating, it needs to be ensured that you address the thoughts and feelings of the client. Also, you need to be careful about your own verbal, vocal, and bodily communication also. And finally, you are checking and understanding. Okay, you're checking your understanding. Counselor can check with the client if the response given by you, by the counselor, was accurate in terms of depicting the client's thoughts and feelings. That is, if counselor has accurately understood and reflected what the client is experiencing. Let us see an example here. The client says that I really wanted that promotion and tried very hard for it, but couldn't get through. So, how does the counselor convey empathy here? The counselor can say, you really worked hard for the promotion, but feeling bad about not getting through it. Okay. So, here the counselor is reflecting what the client has said and the client has felt about it. Okay. So, in empathy, while responding to the expressed feelings of the client, the counselor needs to add significantly to what the client has said and implied. This going beyond what the client has said facilitates in expressing empathy. Now, let us see how do we convey empathy or how do we convey empathy to the client. So empathy can be conveyed by attentiveness. That includes both verbal behavior as well as non-verbal behavior. Okay, your like what you are saying, what your body language, your posture, gestures, all these are conveying. So all these things are important when we are talking about empathy. And also, empathy can be conveyed by the use of various specific skills, such as paraphrasing, probing, summarizing, restating. So, what the client has said and reflecting on the client's feelings and feelings of the client also. So, about all these things, these are called as the basic skills. Okay, reflecting, paraphrasing, attending. These are called as the basic skills. So, about through these skills also we can convey empathy to the client. And about these skills you will learn in the next video also. Okay. So now, learners, we discussed about two core conditions, that is unconditional positive regard and also about empathy. These are very much important. We understood about the meaning of these conditions and also how we can convey these to the client. The third core condition is called congruence or genuineness. Congruence refers to a parity between what the counselor feels and what they express in front of the client. So there is a matching, or there is a congruence between the counselor's feeling and the what the counselor is telling the client. So there is a match between their feelings inside and the behavior outside. How does the counselor feel, and what does the counselor tell or say to the client? So there is a feeling. There is a matching between these two aspects. Okay, so that we call as being congruent when we are expressing. So there is an alignment in the counselor's thoughts, feelings, and actions. Okay. This portrays or helps the counselor come up as being genuine or as an authentic person. Okay. And this also helps the client develop trust on the counselor. And the client will be able to see the counselor as a reliable and responsible person. Okay. With whom the client can share things and open up. Okay. So learners, in the beginning, I have told you that in a counseling situation, when the client comes in the first place, when the client comes in the beginning, initially, the client is really hesitant to open up. Okay. So the counselor's responsibility is to facilitate, create such kind of situation where the client will be able to open up, the client will be able to develop trust. Okay. And towards this end, the congruence as a core condition, it is a very important condition to be fulfilled it's a necessary condition in the counseling situation, so that the client can develop trust on the counselor, and this will help the client to open up in the counseling situation. Okay. So here also this will help the client to consider counselor, to see the counselor as a reliable and responsible person, okay, with whom he or the client can share things and open up. So there are two dimensions to congruence here: internal dimension as well as external dimension. So let us see what do we mean by these two dimensions. Okay. Internal dimension includes awareness of the self, that is, the counselor knows about himself or herself, what are they thinking and feeling in any counseling situation about the client. Okay. So it requires a high degree of self awareness on the part of the counselor. This will help the counselor in knowing about the kind of emotions he or she is experiencing in the counseling situation, whether he or she feels competent or comfortable or uncomfortable with the client's issues, whatever the client is sharing in the counseling situation, or the counselor feels distracted. So the counselor is able to know about himself or herself, be aware about their own thoughts or feelings during the counseling situation when the client is sharing his or her issues or insecurities or concerns. Okay, so this is the internal dimension of congruence. Now, let us see what do we mean by external dimension. External dimension of congruence involves the counselor coming up as a real or authentic person. The client needs to feel that the counselor truly cares for the client. There needs to be and honest and sincere communication by the counselor, which can be achieved when there is a consistency in the verbal, vocal, and bodily communications of the counselor. That is, what the counselor is saying, how the counselor is feeling, what the counselor's body language is expressing. There has to be consistency in all these aspects. Okay. So, in the process of being genuine, we can see here that the counselor may use self disclosure. Okay, so self disclosure is a skill. About this, also, you will be learning in the next video. So, the counselor needs to use self disclosure to convey genuineness. Okay, but this skill, the self disclosure skill, also needs to be used as a skill only when it is required. There is a need for this, and only when it serves the counseling goals. Okay, more detail about this we'll learn in the next video. You'll be knowing about more details of this skill in the next video. Uh, just to highlight here is that the self disclosure, when we are talking about, it is talking about the counselor's feelings and thoughts, okay, or sharing some experience of the counselor. Okay, but as I said, this skill has to be used only when it is serving the counseling goal. Okay. Now, congruence can be expressed through one's body language, nonverbal behavior, and specific counseling skills like openness, immediacy. All this can facilitate expression of genuineness on the part of the counselor. Okay. So, learners, in this video today, we discussed about the core conditions of counseling, which are necessary conditions and sufficient conditions in any counseling situation. And these core conditions are unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence or genuineness. We discussed about the what, why, and how of these core conditions. That is, we learned about the meaning of these core conditions and how why these are important and how we can develop these core conditions in the counseling situation. Okay. So, if these core conditions are lacking, if the counselor is not able to create these core conditions in the counseling situation, for example, if the counselor is keeps on asking questions only to the client, or if the counselor is judgmental in his communication to the client, or the counselor doesn't have sufficient self-awareness, like not aware about their own thoughts and feelings, so they will not be able to provide a therapeutic environment to the client during counseling. And therapeutic environment is very important in counseling, because that uh, the therapeutic environment, the therapeutic relationship between the counselor and client, that makes the counseling effective. Okay. So hence, a counselor needs to be skilled in conveying unconditional positive regard to the client. The counselor needs to show empathy towards the client, and the counselor needs to be genuine during the counseling process, so that the client is able to develop trust on the counselor, and the counseling process is going to be effective, and the client is going to benefit out of it. So, in the next video, we will be discussing more about the basic skills of counseling. Okay. So, thank you.